And we are back with Robert Caro, the author of the monumental magisterial biography of Lyndon Johnson, talking to him about how to wield power in Washington today. So Johnson becomes president, and you point out that he picks a small bill that he wants to pass because he wants a clear victory. Explain that.
Well, you know, Congress has stopped presidents. After the Supreme Court packing fight of 1937, Franklin Roosevelt is never able to get a major piece of domestic social welfare legislation through Congress. Neither is Truman. Congress has stopped presidents. Johnson picks. When he comes in, he says, the Kennedys haven't really even let him know what's going on in the legislative process about Kennedy's civil rights bill. He has to say to Ted Sorensen, Kennedy's aide, I don't know what's in the bill. I have to read it in the New York Times. But he says, what's on the agenda? And the Republican conservatives have introduced a bill that would limit the president's authority on a minor thing, a wheat deal with Russia. Johnson doesn't see it as minor because Lyndon Johnson is a legislative genius. He wants to teach Congress a lesson that there's a new man in charge now. And he says, I want to murder this bill. And what he means by murder is he doesn't want to just beat it. He wants to beat it by such a majority that they know. And he does that. Although he gets the majority, he stays up most of one night, making telephone calls, cajoling, threatening, bullying, getting more votes until he does win by an overwhelming margin. The headlines say Johnson defeats Congress, and Johnson says in his memoir, and this is a correct statement in my opinion, at that moment the power in Washington began flowing from Congress back to the White House.
How would you contrast the leadership styles of Kennedy and Johnson?
Well, you know, John Fitzgerald Kennedy had a greatness about him. I mean, he pulled this country through the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we know now, and you know very well, how close we actually came to nuclear confrontation with Russia, to something beyond confrontation. He inspired the country, you know, in his speeches, the Peace Corps. He made people, he brought out the best in America. What he didn't have a good record in is passing legislation. Lyndon Johnson was clumsy, he was awkward, he was a terrible speaker. But what he could do, you know, he says it's time to write it in the books of law. I mean, that's part of the job of a president too, to write it in the books of law. No one was ever better than Johnson at doing that.
Now contrast the style of Lyndon Johnson with this enormous legislative accomplishment with the style of Barack Obama as you have seen him.
Well, I know I'm supposed to say that there's this great contrast and Obama hasn't done enough, but I feel Obama was faced with some real problems that we hardly remember anymore, the extent of the financial crisis. I happen to think he's made great strides. You know, people find a lot wrong with health care legislation, Fareed, as do I, with the bill that's passed. But I keep remembering something that Lyndon Johnson said. Once we pass it, we can always go back and amend it. And I feel it was an accomplishment to get a health care bill.
But what about the issue that people raise about just the style, which is he delegated too much of the stimulus or even health care to Congress? Do you think he should have been more active? Or, I mean, the alternative view is, look, the Republicans are very strong. Right. The important thing was to get something done. Well, would Johnson have taken a more activist role?
Well, you can answer that definitely. Johnson would have been on the phone every minute with the leaders of Congress. I mean, to watch him work on people. You know, everybody says Johnson was always talking. Not so. You listen to him when he wants something from somebody, he'll let the senator talk, and he'll let the senator talk. And all you hear from Johnson sometimes is, until he hears what he wants to hear. What's the lever he can push with this guy? What does he want, you know? And then Johnson starts speaking, you know, and in this book, Kennedy has a tax cut bill. It's snarled in the Finance Committee. Someone calls him at like 12 o'clock, and says, they've just broken for lunch, and we're 3 votes short. We're not going to get the bill through. Johnson says, who are they? And the guy names the 3 senators. Johnson says to his secretary, get them on the phone for me, one after the other. One is Abe Ribicoff. He says, you know, Abe, I put you on whatever committee he put you on. He says, I want you to help me. Ribicoff says, well, I've already persuaded my constituents. I'll lose face. Lyndon Johnson says to him, you save my face today, I'll save your face tomorrow. And Ribicoff knows that Johnson is a bad man to cross, but a good man to have on your side. One of the other senators wants something, has to do with the mineral bill. Johnson says he'll give it to him. In 14 minutes, if I have that right, at the exact time as in my book, he has turned these 3 senators around. So if you want to know a contrast in styles, I mean, Lyndon Johnson was a contrast with everyone else. He was the greatest legislator, certainly since Roosevelt, and perhaps even including Roosevelt. He was a legislative genius. It seems impossible to pass a Voting Rights Act in 1965. He does it vote by vote. And it's almost, you know, if you care about my books are really about political power. If you care about political power, you say, there never was a man with a talent that is beyond a talent, a gift that's beyond the gift. There never was anyone who could do this like Johnson.
Robert Caro, fascinating as always. Up